Welcome back everyone to our journey, our peek behind the curtain at Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, the set coming out on February 18th. We're going to go ahead and start looking at these cards. We got a lot to look into once again. Probably going to break this up into two different videos. So, with that, let's get into it. So we're going to start with the white cards as always. So this puts us at Born to Drive, a 3-mana enchantment aura that enchants either an artifact or a creature. As long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets +1/+1 for each creature and or vehicle you control. It has channel. So for 3 mana and you discard this card, it'll create 2 1/1 colorless pilot creature tokens, each with the ability that the creatures can crew vehicles as though their power were 2 greater. So this is definitely meant to be in a vehicle deck, and I think that it's not bad. I think it's probably more useful to do the channel effect on this one. So this is probably the first time I've seen a card that I was more excited to discard. So I think tossing in 2 1/1s that can each basically crew a 3 crew requirement vehicle is really good. Of course, if you modify those creatures, they can pilot even bigger vehicles. So I think that overall, I think that's a pretty good card. 3 mana, 2 1/1s that can pilot. I think that's not bad, especially if it's run in a vehicle deck. Most enchantments that buff up your cards are not usually very good because they aren't giving you trample or vigilance or flying, anything like that. So you're just getting one creature really big, making what may already have been a target a bigger target, or what wasn't already a target becomes a target. But in this case, with you getting 2 more creatures on the board, that's advantageous. And for you to be able to pilot another vehicle, I think that's a extra ability that makes this card more valuable. So I like the card. Our next card is Brilliant Restoration, a 7 mana card with heavy devotion to white. 4 mana, has to be white, returns all artifacts and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is a fantastic card. It is pulling out enchantments from white. I think you could still mix it in a blue deck even with a heavy devotion to white. I think because blue runs a lot of enchantments. This is obviously even better if you've got artifact cards like the vehicle decks where you're pulling out essentially creatures. I mean, they need to be crewed, sure, but you're pulling out 4/4s on your board, all of them that were in your graveyard. But I think even without that, I think just pulling out the enchantments, especially since it puts it on the battlefield, your goal here, just in terms of the value, is to get something that, or a couple somethings that are worth at least 7 mana worth of enchantments. And enchantments are already pretty strong, so as long as you can even just match that value of the cards that have been destroyed before, I think this is worth running the card. Even better if you can get higher than 7 mana worth of enchantments out. Keep in mind also that there are creatures that are enchantment creatures, and they would qualify as an enchantment card, so you can pull them out of your graveyard and put them on the battlefield. So just because of that, and with how many different enchantment creatures we're seeing in the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, this is in my top 5 cards already. So I'm very excited about it. That moves us to Invoke Justice, another card with heavy devotion to white, meaning you need 4 mana that is just white. It's a 5 mana card. It's another sorcery that returns target permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of creatures and or vehicle that target player controls. Target player would probably be you, but say you're running a team or a 2-headed giant deck game, then you could always help your partner out instead of yourself in that sense. If they're flying the board out, maybe they're playing with vehicles and you're playing with the samurai, or they're running the samurai vehicle deck that I think they're trying to get you to run, and you're running something different. I think that another white deck that they're trying to make happen here would be anti-vehicles, it looks like. So if you're running that for some reason, your partner's running a heavy vehicle deck, then this is a good way to be able to pull out one big card from your graveyard because you're running a different kind of deck, while still buffing up your partner's board by increasing their power and toughness on their side. More caffeine. So I like the card overall. I think this is just better in a partner game, but even without that, it has heavy devotion to white. I could still see it being run in a samurai deck, a blue-white deck that may be running vehicles. Alright, that moves us to Light the Way. It is a 1 mana card, instant, that allows you to choose one of 2 effects. You can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle and untap it, or you can return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. I think that for 1 mana, it's a pretty good card. I don't think that you do... I don't think... In the first effect, it's good. I don't think it's good because of the counter you're giving it. Though it does count as a modification. 1 mana +1/+1 is a good card just in terms of value you're getting. But again, I'm not huge on the buffing cards just for the sake of buffing them. I know that this set's adding in chain effects for modifying your cards, which you are doing. You're modifying your card by choosing this effect. It's the untap your card effect that I like better on this card. I see this as being played after you've attacked, or I see you doing this on your opponent's turn when they are declaring their attackers. Once they've declared all their attackers, they can't take it back before you declare blockers, or maybe after you've declared the blocker. You could still play this card, but it's useful before you declared your blockers. You've got a card that's tapped. It's why your opponent feels comfortable to attack you. Your card's tapped, you can't use it to block. You play Light the Way, you give your tapped creature who you want to block +1/+1, and you untap it, thus you can declare it as a blocker right away. So this is a good way to be able to have a threat on the board without your opponent knowing you have a threat on the board, which makes this that much better a card. It's a utility spell, best used on your opponent's turn, I think, if you choose that first effect. The second effect is return target permanent you control to its owner's hand. This is more useful if you've already, you've got one card that's being very much debuffed, or it has an effect where when it enters the battlefield something cool happens. For those two reasons, you would play the spell on your turn to choose that effect, return the permanent back to your hand, and then play that permanent either right away or on your next turn, where you can get alright, so it's entered the board, I can get this land from my deck onto the board, or maybe it pulls something from your graveyard. Those are very good. I think this can also be used on your opponent's turn for the second effect, where you've declared a blocker already, and your card is supposed to die. Before combat damage has been dealt, you just declared a blocker, then you play Light the Way, and you pull your permanent back to your hand. It's been declared as a blocker, your opponent's card has been blocked, you take no damage, your card doesn't die. It's a good way to help escape out of that situation, which is a very ninja or samurai-like thing to do. So I think it fits with the theme of the card as well, which makes me think that's really the intention, is to play it on your opponent's turn. I just like to do some combo effects where if I have a card that does something cool when I play it on the board, that I can play that effect again, because usually those effects are powerful effects. So if you can do it twice, then you should do it twice. So I like the card. Alright, the last card that we have for the white section is Sunblade Samurai. 5 mana card. It is a 4/4 enchantment creature. It is a human samurai with vigilance, but it also has the channel ability. 2 mana, discard it, search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle your library, and gain 2 life. For 2 mana, that makes a lot of sense. It's either a 5 mana 4/4 with vigilance, which isn't bad, and it's a samurai, so it's probably meant to be comboed with other samurais, so you're buffing them up. You're modifying your samurai. Or if you're not really getting the lands, you're not going to get to a point where you can play this card for 5 mana. You play the 2 mana, discard it, get a plains into your hand, so you can start building up mana instead. I think that makes this a very good card, and a 2 mana grab a plains from your deck is a good effect. So a 5 mana 4/4 with vigilance, I will say, just evaluating it without the channel effect, isn't a great card. I think for a 4/4 vigilance with no other effect, nothing that protects it from dying, I'd probably expect it to be a 4 mana card for me if I was going to play it. So I think the best use of this card is for the channel, which isn't also great because you don't want to, you might as well have just chosen to run a plains instead of this card in your deck in that case. So I think this is a good card. I think that it's not a great card. It's definitely not brilliant restoration for the white set, but I think that it's a good card. I think that it's best used if you can combo it with other samurai. I like pulling plains from my deck, so it's good, especially in a deck that doesn't have a lot of card draw. Just not great. So that moves us to our blue cards. We're going to start with Guardian of Oboro, a 3/4 Moonfolk Samurai that costs 3 mana and has Defender. Its other ability is that modified creatures you control can attack as though they did not have Defender. So this counts itself in that ability, so it's a 3 mana 3/4. It may have Defender, but if you can at least modify this card in some way, then it will no longer have Defender in the sense that you can attack with it. That's the only thing with Defender is that it stops you from being able to attack with the card. So as long as you modify this card, you can use it right away, which is really good. There are a lot of blue cards that have Defender, so this combos well with them as well. But I think a 3-mana 3/4 is good, but with that Defender effect and you have to modify it, that doesn't really make it a 3-mana card. At that point, it's more of a 5-mana card, since most cards that will modify this creature have a mana value of 2. So this is really a 5-mana 3/4. You're needing, for that to be good, you're needing it to stop other cards you have that have Defender from having Defender, meaning you have to modify them as well. So I think it's just a bit too slow, especially in a blue deck where you're not really running slow cards. You're pouring through your deck, you know, you're cycling through it. So this, in my opinion, too slow. Alright, our next card is the Moon Circuit Hacker. It is a 2-mana 2/1 human ninja enchantment creature. It has the ninjutsu ability for just 1 blue mana, and whenever this card deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, and if you do, you discard a card unless this card entered the battlefield this turn. So that's really good. It combos well with its ninjutsu ability. If you play it right, it's a 1-mana 2/1. It is immediately dealing combat damage that turn, and it enters the battlefield that turn. So you're drawing a card, discarding a card, and blue is all about cycling through your deck, and this is a perfect way to do that. So it fits with a theme. It happens to be a ninja, which is really good for the blue-white. I think this is a good card and adds much needed cycling if you can make it a blue-white deck. Granted, you want ninjas instead of samurais if you're running this deck, so you really need it to be a cycling through, speeding up a slow deck while also keeping to the ninja theme. I think my favorite ninja deck so far seems to be blue-black. And black could use some cycling, but they already have some cards that allow you to do that. So it's not like this is bad in that deck either. I would just be more excited to see it speeding up the white decks. But either way, on its own it's a good card, and if you combo it with the right multicolored deck, blue-black or blue-white, it still ends up being a really good card. So that moves us over to our last blue card that's been sneak peeked today, which is Reality Heist. It is a 7-mana card. It is an instant. So 5 of it is colorless, can be any mana you need. 2 is blue, and it costs 1 colorless mana less to cast for each artifact that you control. Its other abilities that you look at the top 7 cards of your library, reveal up to 2 artifact cards from among them, and put them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is really good in an artifact blue deck, which would make me think in the blue-white samurai vehicle deck it would run well. I think red runs a lot more vehicles, just based on the goblins and how they interact with the vehicles seem to be a little bit better than the samurai, even though the samurai are pouring out tokens that, and there's that one creature that can pilot a vehicle as if it were 2 power greater. I still think you run a red vehicle deck, and if you combo it with another color, it needs to combo with their goblins. So you could do a blue-red vehicle deck, and I could see this working all right in that. So if that ends up being what you run, this is a good card. Otherwise, this isn't a good card. So it is forced to be in that one particular deck, which doesn't make me very excited because I like to see cards that can be utilized in a few different decks, not just one particular deck, especially if I'm not even sure that deck is going to be good. This does make it somewhat worth it to make it a multicolored deck, but you want it to be an obvious, yes, I'm doing a blue-red deck, vehicle deck, and this is an obvious addition to that deck. So I think this card ends up being not quite good enough to run in a deck. It will need some more support. So that moves us to our black cards, and we start with, here we are, the Enormous Energy Blade. It is a 3-mana artifact equipment. The equipped creature gets +4 power, +0 toughness, and whenever this card becomes attached to a creature, you tap that creature, and it's a 2-mana attachment. So really ends up being a 5-mana equipped creature gets +4, +0, and you have to tap the card because that creature had to pick up this enormous blade, is how I'm guessing this is meant to be flavored. I'm already not a fan of artifacts. I don't think this does enough to be worthwhile. So overall, I think, especially since you can only equip it as a sorcery, I think this ends up being too slow and doesn't do quite enough. So, not a terrible card as far as equipments go, but I don't think it's a good card. Alright, and then we get to the Incrise Infiltrator, a 2-mana human ninja, 1/2 with flying, and for 4 mana, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So because this ability is such a high cost, I think that you're getting that ability off once. You theoretically can use this ability as many times on your turn as you'd like, and buff it up twice, 3 times, but you've got to have the mana for it. So if you're running 8 mana in your deck, at that time, I don't think that you wanted to really play Incrise Infiltrator. Even though it has flying, it doesn't do anything else, it's just damage that you're dealing. And in a black deck, that ends up being too slow. In a white deck, that works out okay. You got flying that flies over your opponent's creatures, and that's what makes your deck so strong, is you're swarming them. But in a black deck, if you've got something with flying, it needs to have an awesome effect to go with it. Black decks are a lot stronger than white decks in that sense, where you're making them discard when this card deals damage, or you're dealing Infect back when that was a real big thing. So a black card with flying doesn't end up being enough if all it's doing is dealing damage. So too slow of a card, good for its mana value, but again, too slow to run in the deck. And that brings us to our last black card for the sneak peeks for today, which is Nezumi Blade Blesser, a 3-mana rat samurai. It is a 3/2 and has Death Touch as long as you control an artifact, and has Menace as long as you control an enchantment. So we've seen a lot of cards that seem to combo with having an artifact and enchantment. Most of what we've seen is that with today, we've seen Brilliant Restoration, which brings back all artifacts and enchantments from your graveyard, but for the most part, what we've seen is this card costs 1 colorless mana less to cast for each artifact, for having an artifact, and this it costs 1 less to cast if you control at least 1 enchantment. So this is a lot stronger than that effect, because Death Touch is much more valuable than reducing the cost of a card by 1 mana, and Menace is a lot more valuable than just reducing the cost of a card by 1 mana. So this card is really good if this is running a deck that has enchantment and artifact support. A 3-mana 3/2 Death Touch and Menace is a good card. I think Menace and Death Touch works really well together, since Menace will force your opponent to block with at least 2 creatures, and Death Touch with 3 power, you can deal 1 damage to each of those creatures, so whoever's blocking this card will die at the end of combat, even if this card is dying with its only 2 toughness. So that's a great way to establish a threat on the board that your opponent will probably not stop you from attacking with. I wish it was a ninja though, because it combos really well also with the ability of ninjutsu. So you would almost guarantee this card is dealing damage to your opponent, so long as you've got Menace, so long as you have Death Touch. Your opponent won't want to block this card. It's only 3 damage is how they're going to think of it. And then you swap it out for the card that you really wanted to deal the damage. I think that ends up being a really good effect if you can combo it with the ninjas or ninjutsu effect. So unfortunately, this being a samurai doesn't make it combo as well. And we've seen a few other rat ninjas. I was really excited for a rat ninja deck. Rat samurai, cute card, really good. Even on its own, a 3-mana 3/2 is good as long as you can get the Death Touch and Menace. So even without comboing with ninjutsu, if you can get the other effects, this is a good card. The fact that you have to have that effect for this to be good makes it a bit slow, because for 3 mana, it gives you the sense that it could be played earlier in the game, but those 2 effects where you must control an artifact and enchantment to make this card really good means you're probably playing this more likely turn 4 or 5. So I think this is a bit slow of a card, and it not being a ninja takes it away from me, so I think it's just too slow to run in a deck, though I love the card. Alright, so that moves us to our red cards. We're going to start with Tai of Ancient Wars, a 3-mana card. It is a legendary enchantment creature. It's one of the shrines. It's a 2/2 with first strike, and at the beginning of your end step, you may pay 1 colorless mana, and when you do, this card deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, X being the number of shrines you control. Once again, a shrine that's a creature is great, especially because we've seen a lot of other shrines in the Kamigawa sets before this, and a 2/2 with first strike is good. For 3 mana, it's not very good, but this is a shrine. This combos well with the other shrines, If you've got a deck that's running a decent bit of shrines, this works really well. But I haven't seen a lot of shrines being released in this set, so I think this ends up not being a good card. You just have to run it with a lot of shrines, because X damage needs to be, for this to be worth it, especially if you're paying 1 colorless mana at the beginning of your end step. I think you've got to at least deal 3 damage for that to be worth it. So you're looking for 2 other shrines to be on the board. So if you can get that off, great, but I think it ends up requiring too much of your deck for this to be a card that you have to run in your red deck. So, too slow. So our next card is Haikoyamazaki the General. It's a 4-mana 3/3 human samurai with trample, and whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may cast a target artifact card from your graveyard this turn. This card would be a lot better if it allowed you to pull that artifact from your graveyard and cast it for not paying mana. Keep in mind that this allows you to cast it, so you do have to pay the mana cost of whatever cards you're wanting to get out of your graveyard, making this a lot weaker of a card. It has trample, which of course, we've seen this with the samurais. They're really incentivized to be modified, so a 4-mana 3/3 isn't a good card. A 4-mana 5/5 with trample is a good card. For red, it's still a bit slow. You really want this to be a 6/6 to really be worth your time. I think that they're counting on that other effect to be making up for that value. And I think because you have to pay the mana cost, you're hoping to cast something that was destroyed before that you really just want back. That's really powerful. And I like the fact this gives you that chance. I just don't think that this is fast enough. I think it's too slow. Red decks move fast enough to where if you run something in it, it needs to still be fast. Otherwise, it putters out. That's how red decks work. With the samurai, I think that this is meant to be a red, I guess red-black deck. You don't want to, the only red-white deck I see running is the samurai vehicle. The problem is that, as I said before, the vehicle deck that's going to be the strongest may just be the goblin vehicles. But I know that there's a lot of white support now for the vehicles, but you pretty much are using the samurai. Maybe there's a deck in which you mix samurai and goblins. I know we've seen some goblin samurai already, so maybe you're supposed to mix the samurai with regular goblins to pilot these vehicles. It just seems like that's a lot going on in a deck, and I try to keep my decks to about 60 cards to run quickly, and so for me that's just a lot to happen. Would be really cool if it can work out. Maybe cards like this are what's going to help make that deck a reality. I can see that, but just looking at this card, I think it's too slow for a red deck, so not a good card. Alright, and our last card for the red sneak peek is the Peerless Samurai, a 3-mana 2/3 human samurai with menace, and whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, the next spell you cast this turn costs 1 colorless less to cast. So I think that this is a not bad card. A 3-mana 2/3 with menace is already a good card, and for it to also reduce a spell in your hand by 1, so long as a samurai or warrior attacks by itself, I think makes this even better of a card. So I think this is a card you run in your, theoretically, your goblin samurai vehicle deck, but I think this is a good card that you might even, a good enough card where you might even run this with a warrior kind of mixed deck. They have a lot of warriors out there for red, so I could see this still being worthwhile to run in a red deck that just runs mostly warriors. And it's a different deck. It's not a vehicle deck in that sense. There's not a whole lot of warriors that we're dealing with right now, but there's just a ton of them out there for red. So I could see this being a good card in more than just one deck, which in my mind, that increases the value of a card. So this ends up being good enough to run in a red deck, so long as you've got other warriors or other samurais, depending what deck you're putting it into. 3-mana 2/3 with menace isn't so good a card, though, that you run it in any red deck. You do want to combo this off, because as good a card as a 3-mana 2/3 with menace is, most red decks are running off of one specific strategy, and if you draw this card, it doesn't fit those strategies of dealing a bunch of damage to your opponent or swarming them. So I think good card. I think you run it, but you combo it with samurai or warriors. So before we move on to our next set of green card sneak peeks. We're going to stop the video here, and we will pick up in part 2 of today's sneak peeks, where we will get into the green cards and all the way through to the saga cards. So I'll see you all there. See you next time.